as I continue to read through this book, so what I think is for me, yeah, Sister Soldier's Winter. Yeah. Um, a couple things, and I have honestly, I have as I've been reading this, I have this ongoing stream of Coco's shows and her discussions of nationalism and the nationalist project, sort of not so much in the background, but as a parallel. So I do hope that she'll offer some thoughts on this, as we all will, because again, initially I'm thinking of this, and this is I tend to do this, and I tend to get myself in little bits of trouble for it, but I tend to think of this not as a contradiction to the Black Nationalist Project. Now I know both sides would disagree, but initially I'm thinking, because again, if there is to be a a Black nation, an independent Black nation on this continent, it can't exist if the other powers or the existing powers either exist at all or exist in their current form or anything akin to their current form. So either the currently dominant colonizing power has to be fully destroyed and removed, or removed similarly through a process of a socialist revolution and reconstruction. So as I'm reading this, I do think of there are going to be world majority people, Black people, and others who will stay within the socialist reconstructed society. And then there would be those who would opt for what I would suspect would be a more likely possible existing Black nation, even if it were to remain here internally on this continent. But without so when Garvey was saying Africa for Africans, I keep thinking socialism for Europeans and nationalism with socialism for Africa. I'm not gonna look at the chat yet. I can only imagine what you all are doing with that. But that is, at least I want to at least explain to a certain extent my thinking in this. That is, the Black nation must be socialist. It can't be a Black capitalist nation. So that's really what I mean by that. And it can't survive if Europeans don't go to socialism, unless there is this move to either eradicate Europeans, or, as Francis Cress Welsing has said, sort of manage them, create a situation where they can be managed, and their whiteness and white supremacy just can't run rampant, unchecked. In other words, they have to be dealt with. This idea that we can just recoil into ourselves, nationalize, and have any sort of claimed territory doesn't work for me without this. And that, going back to George Jackson, what he was saying in the last section that we were reading in Blood in My Eye, there can't be, at this point or in the initial stages, there can't be a territory to defend. The guerrilla has to be everywhere. So in that case, you can't have this separate Black nation or this territory requiring defense. It can't work. It won't win. And then at best, we'll have a neo-colonial state. And I'm not interested in that. So, okay. So at least just, again, a summary of my logic, to the extent you call it that or accept it as such. That's how I'm approaching it. So in this third chapter, An Energy Future for People and the Planet, and again, I'm reading this in order. I have not read ahead, so I'm reading this in order and reviewing it in order. So I don't know if, and I'm hoping that there is some discussion before the end of the book of how we get to this point. So are they going to say we have, this is post George Jackson, this is post some other process? But what I appreciate a lot is that what the book is doing is clarifying what socialism is and is not, and how, practically speaking, a socialist government would work and could work. And I do like that. Beyond all the rhetoric, beyond all the phony descriptions and definitions of socialism from actually not from those who don't actually want socialism, this is very helpful. So this chapter focuses mostly on the climate crisis, obviously titled "Energy an Energy Future for People and the Planet." So it focuses on the climate crisis and acknowledges, of course, that capitalism can't provide a solution to the climate crisis because capitalism is the crisis. Capitalist production always and necessarily places profit over people and the planet. So as they go on to say here, maintaining the imperialist world order and the capitalist system that is making sure that the billionaire class and most privileged sectors of society don't have to change how they produce and consume energy is what those in power have as a goal. And that this chapter demonstrates how a socialist reconstruction of energy in response to the climate crisis and in contrast to capitalism's contradictions lays the basis for redressing histories of exploitation, colonialism, extractivism, and imperialism. In this and in subsequent chapters, we don't tell people exactly what to do and how to live. Socialism is about equal freedom, coordination, and planning, not command. I thought this was a very important point that they make. I'm glad that they make it because there's this constant refrain that we can't do socialism because it is taking away our freedoms and our property, and we won't have any individual rights and thought. And that is, of course, a promoted concept by capitalists and those who have no interest in there being any socialism or threat to their power. So they talk then about, over the next few pages, the need to decommodify energy. And as I've talked about for a long time, one of the core tenets of Marx is that anything can be commodified. That commodity, as he said, is capitalism's original sin. So in this case, energy has to be commodified, as must energy be decarbonized. So a socialist approach to the climate crisis begins with the abolition of private ownership of the means of production and capitalist energy markets. And then they start to talk about how they're going to reconstruct and reorder organizing and distributing energy. Production and distribution will be democratically planned and coordinated. And that this would deal with problems that we have today, such as stranded assets. I remember years ago reading how they would, store. For me, there was a story of grain, and it was, they let, I don't remember the number, but thousands of tons or whatever of grain go bad over time just to keep the prices internationally and I was stabilized, or to in their benefit rather. And I'm saying, wow, you got all these people starving, and we have enough to feed and help and improve, and you'd rather have it go bad anyway. Oh wait, is this the Kamau paradox explained? Oh no, not yet, not yet. As they say here, but and this was I said here, socialized versus nationalized, because they say here, as soon as we socialize ownership of production, we claim all energy producing enterprises and corporations for the people and transform them into public utilities. And I don't know if this is intentional, but I like how they use, in this sense, I like that they use socialized versus nationalized, because nationalization gets so many people in trouble and is misunderstood. And it's if you put it in the terms of I think socializing, it helps brand the idea a little bit better. So and I like that. We're not going to have Exxon and Mobil and in Maryland, BG&E and all of that. We're going to have socialized public utilities. So, right. So part of it's socialized as opposed to nationalized public utilities. In a little bit later in the chapter, they're going to give some more examples of this, how this, what these agencies would look like and how they'd be named. But the next point that they get to here is decolonizing energy. And then they talk about the 2010 World People's Conference on Climate Change, where over 140 countries gathered, over 35,000 delegates from social movements to talk about the climate debt that had developed, that the developed countries owe the rest of the world. In other words, that the extractivism and the colonization has created the climate crisis, and it's the people in those colonized parts of the world that are suffering the most. So, as they say here, they highlight 5 aspects of the US's climate debt to colonized and indigenous people. So, first, we acknowledge the historical responsibility of US capitalist class for genocide, settler colonialism, and imperialism. Secondly, recognizing the climate debt inherited from the US capitalist class in practice means the US is accountable for tens of millions of people forced to migrate because of climate change. Third, because of our climate debt, we are obliged to help other countries adapt to the changing climate. Fourth, and relatedly, we will learn from from indigenous people, agricultural workers, and small farmers around the world as we replace environmentally destructive industrial agriculture and with regenerative and labor-intensive farming practices. We will benefit from their knowledge and experience. Fifth, we recognize the imperative of reforming the much vaunted American way of life. US practices of overconsumption do not provide a social model for the rest of the world. 5 Earths would be needed if everyone on the planet consumed as much as the average American. And this is where I think we get to the Kamau paradox. As we detail below, this means the US, particularly its middle and upper classes, has to make unilateral changes to its way of life to eliminate wasteful practices and certain excessive habits, otherwise known as the Kamau paradox. Because if you remember from the other day on the remix, Kamau, and to be fair, myself included, struggled a little bit with the idea that, particularly is for me in terms of access to air conditioning, that we would have to give up some of that to benefit the rest of the world. But in fact, it is true. But they do say something here. I'm gonna come. Wait, let me find that spot. I'll come back to it. I thought they said it. Okay, well, maybe it comes up later on. Because they make a point in saying somewhat similar to what I had been trying to say, that it's no, I think they're making it. No, they're talking about no. We just have to give up. We have to make changes. We'll come back to that. So, in other words, the Kamau paradox. I don't want to have to give up my air conditioning. I want other people to have more access to it. But the reality is that's not realistic. We would need 5 Earths to produce all of that for everybody. So the reality is people in Kamau and my own position we were going to have to give something up. Um, as they talk about the decolonization processes, they say here it is no accident that Black communities routinely face the life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants. Speaking to the realities of Black and Indigenous communities having to always be in what they call sacrifice zones, where their schools and communities are put in the worst or the least desirable regions, suffering from what they call environmental racism. So that they say here, decolonizing energy demands decolonizing the Black community, nothing less. So I know this doesn't necessarily mean it in the way that those certain among us within the Black or various Black communities approach the issue of decolonization. But this is sort of the point I was getting at. Even it is recognized here from the perspective of the PSL and this socialist group, which is, I think it would be unfair to describe as a white organization, but as is often understood to be representing a Eurocentric or a Western or a white dominated or led or involved effort. But even from their perspective, there's a recognition that decolonizing has to occur. There has to be an end to the colonial relationship. So as they talk about decarbonizing energy, because remember it was decolonizing and decarbonizing, they talk about a 10-year plan to eliminate fossil fuels, and that would require a 10% decrease the first year, a 20% decrease the second year, and so on until fossil fuel production is eliminated entirely in the 10th year. They go through this a lot of cap and adapt plan, cap and convert, but essentially that's what they're talking about. A 20-year plan, I'm sorry, a 10-year plan to get rid of dependence or use of fossil fuels. And it's here that they start to talk about how would they carry all of this out. And they talk about four agencies reporting to and under the guidance of a central economic agency, which, if you remember, we mentioned in the last chapter, it replaces sort of the need for and even in reference to a CIA, we would have a CEA. Of course, the CIA is an intelligence military wing meant to protect capitalism and U.S. dominance. The CEA would be here to assure that wealth is developed and redistributed in a way that's not harmful to the earth and is not harmful or extractive when it comes to labor. So they talk about the Climate Mobilization Agency, which would work closely with unions to organize the massive transformation of production required to shift to renewable energy sources. The Fair Response Agency that will develop and implement the plan for responding to any energy shortages and arise during the transition. A Research and Education Agency that will coordinate climate and energy related education and research. And that will lead us to a new American way of life, or a reconstruction of the American way of life. So this is the part I was sort of getting to a moment ago. On the one hand, the socialist government will not take away individuals' cars or homes, contrary to anti-communist propaganda. These will be recognized as personal property. On the other hand, the country's existing housing and automobile stock is unsustainable and will need to be adapted. So on the one hand, to the kamau paradox, we would be able to keep our homes. They just might not receive as much air conditioning and overall energy use, which is a legit, I mean, it's legit. Obviously, we can't sustain it. But I'm also assuming that as we also are allowed to keep our cars, that eventually those cars will have to be replaced by mass transit, which I'm sure will be dealt with in this book, and or some other form of transportation that wouldn't require gas and even electricity, which is itself drawing from those same fossil fuels resources. The US is one of the world's largest consumers of energy, so this would have to change. In 2019, the country consumed a massive 79,897 kilowatt hours of energy. For comparison, citizens in other high energy consuming countries such as Germany, France consume little more than half of what we consume in this country. So that would have to all change. So just as they move to a conclusion in this chapter, going back to something I remember when Van Jones was running this, the green, what was it? The green capitalism. Anyway, it's a myth unless green refers to money. By replacing profit-oriented production with production based on meeting the needs of people and the planet, that is to say, by shifting from the demands of the market to democratically determined plans, we can already expect a significant decrease in our energy demands. Why? Because most of us prefer not to spend our lives working for the enrichment of the few at the cost of our futures. Given the choice, we will decide to diminish the amount of social labor spent producing and importing goods that are unnecessary, quickly obsolete, and destined for landfill. When we understand our impact on the environment and plan our production accordingly, we will collectively acquire the habits of conserving and cherishing the resources that go into the goods we make and the resources these goods command after they are made. Anyway, and that's it. So I like, again, what they're doing here in this chapter, showing this is how we can reorganize a society and plan for a reduction in the harm we're creating to labor and the planet, and can start to build new attitudes. Because I like that they address this point, that it recognizes that a lot of our attitudes are based on our material reality, our socialization, and that this can be changed. And for some of us, in terms of our energy use and dependence on air conditioning, et cetera, and so forth, that can be changed. I'm less clear how we get here, so I'm looking forward to that part of the book, and how they expect that struggle to look and to work. But I like that they're doing some of the initial heavy lifting of properly defining what socialism is and isn't, and how it would work and how it could function in a relatively, I want to say unchanged, but I mean in a way that they're not describing this as science fiction or fantasy. It's being described as in a way that comports with the world as is currently arranged, except for that process, because there's going to clearly be resistance to this, and those who are well funded and well resourced are absolutely not going to just allow this to happen. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.